Oh. Good morning. Good morning. Is this working? Hi, everyone. I'm Judy Sherman, and our 9:45 start time has arrived. I apologize for some confusion about a 9:30 start time, but we needed that extra 15 minutes to chit-chat. So, welcome to Where Your Giving Goes. This is a joint program from the Stewardship Committee. Most of us are in here. If you're on Stewardship Committee, raise your hand. Dana, Steve, Trudy, Rodney's in the back, Mark, okay. And Finance, Chairman Bruce is with us. But it's a program that sort of was conceived by both committees. And let me just give you a little context, some context, of why we felt this program was needed and might be helpful at this point in time. So, excuse me. Okay. We are all stewards of First Grapevine, and we know that our prayers, our presence, our witness, service, and giving are very important. After all, these are the 5 commitments we make in our Methodist membership vows to support the church and grow as disciples of Christ. As we hope you saw in our e-news series last October, the Stewardship Committee began offering stories about each of these vows. Most of them were personal stories about how seeds planted in prayers, presence, witness, service, and even giving bore fruit with God's blessings in so many ways. We will continue to solicit those stories across the congregation in the coming year and hope to move the notion of stewardship beyond a once-a-year campaign to solicit financial pledges. Now, don't get me wrong. The importance of our Harvest Miracle pledge season and the success we had last year can't be understated. But we want to think of stewardship and all the ways we give and serve as more like a blossoming tree, as you see in our logo up here, sustained by a healthy trunk rooted in the love of all members of First Grapevine. And that brings us to the heart of today's program. All of us can easily feel, see, and experience the benefits of our service, our prayers, witness, and presence. But do we fully understand the impact of our giving? I expect I'm like a lot of folks who, until I joined the Finance Committee, frankly, didn't have much of a clue about how my donations, that I simply thought of as tithing, were being used by the church. We tithe because the Bible tells us to do so. I didn't really think about the difference between giving to the church and giving to a mission like Latvia or Costa Rica, or giving to a program like Be Our Guest, and the other many, many programs and projects that we all support. For whatever reason, with apologies to Trudy and Steve and other staff folks, for whatever reason, I really never thought about their work behind the scenes of those missions and programs. After all, who's paying for the lights and air conditioning in the Family Life Center to conduct VAST or host programs like our Women's Retreat next Saturday? The fantastic video productions and online worship capabilities we enjoy. These and other examples will be mentioned again. I bring them up just to set the stage for our objective, to help everyone understand where your giving specifically to church operations actually goes and why. More important, we hope you'll see how our giving can empower First Grapevine to expand our thinking about what we can accomplish. As Pastor Mike recently pointed out, we should be operating on a model of abundance. Our church does unbelievably great work with the resources we have today. Imagine what we can do for God and what God can do in our community as we expand our model of abundance. So now I'd like to introduce our panel up here that will delve into very specific topics for us this morning. Greg Weston, Bruce Herndon, and Walter Merrill. Okie doke. Let's start with, you have the program, the questions. Greg, I think I remember what your question is. What is your question?
What are the church's sources of income?
Let me get the other question.
Where does our revenue come from? Is my mic on? No.
Test.
I'm going to trade with Bruce here. Okay. So what are the church's sources of income? We should have a slide up here. Yeah, we do. Okay. Well, actually, our sources of income, it all comes from Steve Allen, our finance guy. He brings in all the money. Prior to me becoming involved in the stewardship committee and the finance committee, I actually thought that a significant portion of our church's income came from the conference, came from the Central Texas Conference. It wasn't until I learned a lot more that, no, that's not the way it works. In fact, if you look at the slide up here, you are the primary source of our income. You, our congregation, you, our donors, you are the ones who are responsible for 95% of the church's revenues. There's another slice of that pie up there that shows 5%. That 5% is various fee income. So if you were going to have a wedding here, you can rent the facility, and there's some fees for that. There are fees for other facility rentals. But interestingly enough, the largest category of our fee income comes from the phone companies, the cell phone companies. We actually rent our steeple out, space in our steeple, and we get a nice revenue stream from all of the phone companies because they need those cell towers close by here. So those are the primary sources of our income. And if you look at the various buckets that are up here, you can see three of them on here. You see church operations or operating budget, and then you see designated, and then you also see endowment. When we look at the largest bucket, which is church operations, I like to think of that as church operations as the heart of the church. The heart pumps that blood through every other part of our organization, through all of our missions, through all of our ministries. It provides that life-sustaining nourishment. So Walter's going to talk a little bit later about that, but there is truly what I call a magnifying or multiplying effect, and Walter will touch in more detail on how that nourishment from the operations, the heart of the church, nourishes and supplies the life-sustaining blood and magnifies and multiplies it through many of the missions and ministries that we support. The other buckets you see up there, the designated bucket, Judy talked a little bit about some of our designated ministries. We actually have 172 accounts on our books for designated. There are 96 of them that actually have funds in them right now. But one of the things that you should be clear on is if you give to the church and you make a designation, the church is good stewards of that. We make sure it goes to that particular designated use that you want it to go to. The third bucket you see up there is the endowment fund. Now, I believe we did have a little bit of a learning session on the endowment fund, but just as kind of a refresher, the endowment fund is for church facilities, church maintenance, upgraded facilities, and we have a specific committee that meets and decides what those funds are used for. One other thing to just step back and be clear on, when you give to the endowment fund, that principal is never dipped into. The only thing that is used is the earnings off of what goes into the endowment fund. So, in conclusion, your funds, you are the source of our funds. The majority of it goes to church operations. Church operations is really the heart of the church. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Mr. Bruce. By the way, we're going to have a time for questions at the end. We hope to entertain any and all questions that any of you have, but just hold those to then if you don't mind. So, Bruce, how does the church know what income to expect each year?
I'm going to move up here so I can put my notes out that my lovely wife graciously ran back home and got for me. Where are we here? Okay, how does the church know what income to expect? Well, as Greg just told you, 95% of our monies come from you. And so we have the wonderful Harvest Miracle campaign like we just had, and we see what our base pledges are. And is there a second slide I'm missing? Let's see. Nope. Well, I'm missing part of the slide. There are three components, in essence, of our receipts of income. There are the pledges, as I just mentioned, that we have an amount from Harvest Miracle, or each year when we run our campaign. And then we have a certain amount of unpledged. There are folks out there that do not pledge, but they are very faithful givers. A lot of the unpledged monies are monies that end up in the offering plate. So if you think past couple of years, we haven't had that offering plate available, and per se, we haven't been passing it. Believe me, Methodists got to pass that offering plate every time we meet, except today, because we want to tell you where it goes. But bottom line, the execution of our programs, how we make those work, is basically based on the funds that we receive. The pledged, the unpledged, and the miscellaneous that Gray referred to, cell tower rental, wedding fees, that type of thing. I'm sorry? I'm going to go to the priorities. I believe that's probably the best thing, because what I don't have to show you is how, I'll just tell you that the way, though, that the giving goes here in this church is the first 3 quarters, we sit there and we struggle to make budget. We operate in a deficit for the most part. And then in the 4th quarter, it's been this way for years, we have this influx of funds. And that's when we all take a big deep breath and say praise the Lord and thank you. Just to give you an example, our 4th quarter last year, of the last 6 years, was the 2nd highest, which is incredible given COVID and all that type of thing. So as far as budget performance, just real quickly, the way the slide's up there, it's a little skewed, but we only spend up to basically what you have given. And then we start the process of paring down our budget, paring down our expenses, and the staff has done a wonderful job the last 2 years under the circumstances of holding expenses. Last year, we only ended up just a few $1,000s short of income versus expenses, but we made it. we did survive. So let me have the next slide, which is who sets those priorities? Hello? There we go. See all the arrows? See the operating budget? We have two very holy people because of all those arrows. Steve and Trudy take all those arrows. They receive input from every ministry department that we have. And those ministry departments tell us what's it going to take for me to operate. Read off some of those because it's hard to see from the... Okay. If you can't see back there, you have the ministerial and program staff, which is because that's our pastors, that's our teen leaders, our children's leaders, etc. You have support staff. You have debt service. You have utilities. I can't see them either with my back turned. You have missions and evangelism. You have media ministry. We have a fantastic media staff here that puts in a lot of hours and produces a lot of wonderful stuff for us. But they submit, each department submits what they believe are required to support the missions and ministries of this church. And then there is some discussion, and we attempt then to match that against our projected incomes, and that's what we operate on. In essence, some of you will remember back in the day when you went into the store and the guy had the cigar box there, and he'd open his cigar box and put a little cash in, or he'd give you the change out of that. We're a cigar box operation. We don't sell anything per se. I'll let Walter tell you what we're going to sell. But we don't make widgets. I can't come to you from the finance department and say, Mike, we got to turn it up. We got to make more chips. We got to make more widgets. We got to do this. We got to do that. To create income. Our income is based on your generosity. So I hope you see how much income we expect is based on your giving, and how we set those priorities is based on what this church needs to do.
Thanks, Bruce. There was a lot of discussion to create yet a second beautiful slide that you all missed. I think we'll have to send it out on e-news. We'll send a copy of this PowerPoint. Everyone can, I know, be anxious to download that and take a look at it. So, okay, Walter, we've heard about the impact, we all know that, of our gifts to support the day-to-day operations of the church. But if we think about donations to missions, it's pretty easy to understand the impact there. But how do we actually measure the impact of donations to the church's general budget?
Well, it's interesting you should ask. I have a friend who's a Presbyterian minister, and his name is Frank Yates. He's in New Mexico. He was my youth pastor growing up, and he taught me, he said, you know, the church is a saving institution, not a savings institution. So I thought that's a great line as we think about, you know, how do we measure the impact of our operating budget? And it's difficult to know how many lives have been touched. But we have to change our thinking a bit. Those of us that live our lives in business, we all want to know, well, what's my return on investment? What's my productivity? And if you think about productivity from a church's perspective, it really would be how many people are touched, how many souls are saved. Isn't that the business that the church is in, is spreading the word of God, sharing the gospel with his people? That's a difficult measurement, and it's different than we measure in business. In business, we know, oh, how many widgets did I produce? What was my productivity per employee? All of those things are easily measured, and from an operating perspective, it's difficult to measure how many people we touch. But let me give you a few examples, and I want to link some of the things together from stewardship because you heard earlier, our operating budget really is grown and made more impactful by your volunteer service. So prayers, presence, witness, gifts, and service are all elements of stewardship. So when we think about the operating budget and its impact, I think we should think of it in all of those elements. So we had over 5,000 hours of Sunday school participation. So on an annual basis. So the 5,000 hours of Sunday school participation. And Sunday school is a great example of the multiplier of our budget. If we had to, many of you volunteer to teach Sunday school. If we had to pay our Sunday school teachers the Sunday school wage, a teaching wage, our operating budget for Sunday school would need to be 10 times what our budget is. So your commitment to prayers, presence, gifts, witness, and service tied to Sunday school and leveraging the operating budget delivers a fantastic program. We have great mission programs. As you mentioned earlier, when you have a designated gift, when you say, I want to give money to Weekend Food, or I want to give money to Kenya, that money goes into a specific account dedicated to that, but 100% of that gift goes to that mission because all of the administration of those gifts and the facilities and resources needed to support that program come from the operating budget. So the operating budget, while you won't see a line item for Kenya missions, it supports Kenya missions because it multiplies your gift to that program. We offer a lot of programs in our community. In 2021, we had 225 participants in Vacation Bible School. That's supported by the operating budget. Again, this is an outreach to the community. Our facility supports that, our volunteers support that, and our staff supports that. Lives are touched, the gospel is taught, and people are changed. Again, it's difficult to measure. 225 children came to Vacation Bible School. How many of those touched someone? How many of those touched someone else? You have the multiplying effect as it goes out into the community. We have lots of different worship opportunities. We've changed. So I was on finance committee right before COVID hit, and fortunately we made the determination, we made an investment in new media, new cameras, and they've been really impactful. We've had 45,000 hours of worship participation in 2021, all supported by the operating budget. 45,000 hours, so that's the number of participants times number of worship services. But that's 45,000 worship hours that people have participated in during 2021. Again, that's impactful. Our villages are supported through the operating budget. When you give money to Kenya, it goes 100% to Kenya. Another program that we have from the operating budget is VAST. So in 2021, we supported 1,260, I call them child days, of VAST, and that's an after-school program and educational program supporting our community. So the question I always ask, how many souls have we saved? How many lives have been touched? How many people have learned about the wonders of Jesus and the forgiveness that we're offered through the gospel? That's how we measure the church, and it's a very difficult thing to measure, and I think our stewardship and our giving to the church is an example of our faith. We don't know how many lives are touched. We don't know how many people are changed. And yet, we give to the church. We give to God's programs so that our church can reach out in the community and deliver the good news of the gospel.
Thank you, Walter, and a big amen to that. Okay, I think we'll open it up to some questions from you guys. Let me hand this to Dana. Charles, I see you have a question. Charles, where are you?
Bruce, being on the trustees committee, I have one question. At the beginning, when the finance committee meets to determine the operating budget, how do y'all determine what maintenance and upkeep budget is, how that's set up for the church? I've always wondered, is that covered in the main budget, or is that something we?
Yeah, general maintenance upkeep is covered under the general budget, and we use historical data is the simplest way to put it. We'll go back and review last year's utilities, any projected increases that there may be. We will We have a certain amount that we will set up for replacing light bulbs or a water heater, that type of thing. But nothing major on the capital improvement side that the trustees would normally handle.
Well, like for example, something's come up, the air conditioning units for the Founders Chapel lobby have to be replaced. So that type of thing is an unexpected situation, and so we don't have anything set aside to cover that, correct?
Not in the general operating budget. Let me just address it this way. The church doesn't have a savings account, per se. What we have is we have a little cash reserve that we work off of to, as I mentioned earlier, in the lean months, we may have to dip it a little into that cash reserve to pay the utility bills. And then hopefully that's replaced by the end of the year. What the church has now with the sale of the parking lot last year is we have a reserve for major capital expenses. So in that case, if an air conditioning goes out, a roof starts leaking, we do now have a capital reserve to work that out of. We also have the endowment fund. If the situation presents itself, we have a little reserve there that we can go to the endowment fund. And by the way, we don't just go reach in there and grab some money and pull it out. There is a process, and the trustees will tell you there's a lot of paperwork to fill out before you get that money from the endowment fund. They want, it's a complete and from beginning to end process where we have to show where that money goes. So to that extent, Charles, does the church save for lean years? Does the church, there's no formal saving for major occurrences. Does that make sense?
More preventative maintenance versus...
Preventative maintenance is our primary focus, yes.
Thanks, Bruce. Let me just clarify one thing, a couple of things that Bruce was just touching on. So most of you know we sold the parking lot over there, and it gave us a nice payday, but that was a capital project, the parking lot, and the conference, as I understand, has certain rules. So since that money from a capital sale has to be then saved for future capital expenses and projects. So that's a great thing. Hooray that we were able to make that sale, but that money, as Bruce just mentioned, cannot be used to pay salaries and to do the day-to-day work of the church, so to say. And also the endowment, Elaine is here, and will, I know, answer any questions from anyone about the endowment fund, but that is a totally separate entity. It's a separate legal entity, a trust, if you will, that was set up by the gracious donations and seed money years ago, and has grown and grown and grown. But as Bruce said, it's not something the church owns, okay, just to make that kind of clarification. Okay, who else had a question? Oh, George, come to you next, Julie, thanks.
Okay, if my understanding is correct, from what you said there a while ago, we received nothing from the charge conference, is that correct?
Yes, you are absolutely correct. We do not.
Why do we pay these apportionments then?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question about apportionments. First of all, let me describe what apportionments are. The apportionment is what we do pay to the Central Texas Conference, and it's a percentage of our budget. If you want to know from last year's numbers, our budget was approximately $90,000. I believe $87,000 is what Steve shared with me. But in actuality, we ended up paying in excess of that. So we paid over 100% of what we were budgeted to pay for our apportionments in 2021.
Okay, what do we get out of that?
Hey, George, wait, there is some income from apportionments. There's 2 grants we've received for this year. I believe, this off the top of my head, I believe they totaled about $45,000. I'm sorry, $60,000, thank you, that we've received for specific programs from the conference. So there is some programmatic funds that come into the church from the conference.
Okay,
Yeah, the Central Texas Conference has their missions and ministries, and the apportionments that we pay to them are used so they can go out and do their ministry and mission work, as well as they have operations to obviously support the bishop and their staff. So there's a lot of good uses for those funds. I kind of think of the apportionments as our tithing to the Central Texas Conference.
just one more question.
Sure.
On the designated funds, due to the fact that it takes time and everything for Trudy and everybody to take care of those, can there anybody, a portion of that, say 5% or whatever, be used for that?
A portion of the oh, I see what you're saying.
Operating,
Yeah, no, that's a valid question. As we talked earlier, the church operations or the operations budget, without that, the other stuff doesn't exist. And I understand what your question is, and I don't know if there's a way to look back at that and say, and I guess I would equate that with, so there are sometimes when you go to make a donation and you do it via your credit card, where they come back to you and they say, well, can you cover the credit card fees of 2% to do that? That's an excellent question, and to be honest with you, I don't know what the process would be in order to do something like that. But I'll let Judy see if she can shed some additional light on that.
Steve, tell me if I'm wrong, but we cannot go back on any current designated funds without getting the express permission from every donor to that fund. We cannot go back to those designated funds and say, do you mind if we pull 5% from Be Our Guest or whatever, pick your program. However, I will acknowledge that there is conversation that comes up time and again on Finance Committee and so forth about making that election that Greg just mentioned, when you're making a donation to a program or mission, you can also specify in the memo or whatever, by the way, I would like 5% of this donation to be designated to church operations, church staff, or whatever. So you can always do that with your own specific donation. Julie had a question, yeah.
Actually, it's not a question. It's just something that I want to bring out. Because part of our pledge to the church is not only gifts, but it's service. Last year, we implemented a program called the $2 a year staff. And we have a facilities crew that comes in and volunteers, and we have people that work in the office that volunteer. That has saved the operating budget at least $100,000 a year, because we have 2 positions that we have not had to fill because we're using volunteers who are giving of their service. And so when you hear about the $2 a year staff, I just want people to understand that is another way of giving back to the church by volunteering your time and services to the church.
Thanks, Julie. And yeah, that's an overwhelmingly important aspect to stewardship. So thanks for mentioning that.
Is there a place where we can see what the church is spending? Is it like online?
Great question. Walter, you want to take that?
You can see the church budget. Bruce and the Finance Committee meet once a month. That is an open meeting if you want to attend. Bring your calculator with you. I would encourage you if you do. And I've been on Finance Committee several times. It is a very good discussion, and I will share with you, it's a different discussion than I have in business. And you can see that, and you can also get a copy of the church budget by contacting the church office. So if you want to see what the church budget is, what the proposed income and proposed spending are, but I will tell you that that proposed spending and income and expense is adjusted every month. And it's adjusted in a prayerful manner, in a different manner than you do in a business setting.
But the basis of your question, I think, is very good. And I would mention that the church has invested in a next generation software platform called Shelby Next. Many of you in here, I know, are involved in committees helping to implement that. Bruce, so you love Shelby Next. You love the Next, he does. But one of the aspects to Shelby Next will be an enhanced ability to track service hours and to recognize those elements of our stewardship, and hopefully to also bring more information, more detail to the congregation. Is that fair, Steve? He's nodding. He said yes. Thank you very much. He would correct me, I'm sure. So, who else has a question?
And I would like to add one thing. The Finance Committee is looking into, I did hear the word online. We are looking into, is that the appropriate thing to do, and where we would possibly put, each month's results so it'd be accessible. So it's on the plate for this year.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Cindy?
We hear a lot about planned giving. Can you explain that to us a little bit more?
Gee, Cindy, thanks for asking.
And in addition, I think maybe we should get another steeple.
I'll take that one, guys. We usually think of a planned gift as something that someone has planned to give at the end of their life, through their estate plan, and so forth. So very often, members obviously pass, and their family will leave a gift, we consider that a planned gift, to the church, operations, to the endowment, or to a designated gift. There are also, quote-unquote, planned gifts that are very advantageous for tax purposes that many of us can take advantage of throughout the year. You've had a huge windfall in GameStop stock. Okay, those of you that had that big run-up in GameStop last year would have had an opportunity to donate that stock and avoid the huge capital gain tax. So you can donate stock to the church, and you get to take that as a tax deduction. That's a good thing. Those of you that are taking your required minimum distributions that Uncle Sam wants us to take from our retirement accounts when we turn 72, if you are fortunate enough not to really need those donations, Uncle Sam says you're taking them anyway. Well, the tax code changed a few years ago so that instead of counting those distributions as income that you pay full tax on, you just send those contributions directly to the church, and you get the full charitable donation instead of taxation on those things. So those are the kind of examples of some planned giving. Steve is very fluent in this. I'd be happy to answer questions, but we welcome those gifts both to the church budget as well as the endowment and designated programs. Anything else?
And we can designate, you said, where that goes also, is that right?
Yes. That was not part of what you were supposed to ask, Cindy Sue. You ad-libbed, okay. If there are no other questions, I'm going to ask Pastor Mike to wrap us up. I know you'll be surprised to know he has a few thoughts of his own around this subject. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you, certainly all of you all for sharing so well, answering questions maybe, and helping you understand about giving in our church. Now, talk about planned giving. Rhonda and I, we've tithed all our married life. So before that, so 10% we've given to the church for a long time. But in our will, we do have 10% set aside to give to the church. Whatever church I'm serving at the time receives that 10%. Our kids get the rest. And so that's kind of how we're doing it. So, and we've made that part of it. It's been part of our life. Well, it should be part of our death and part of our everlasting life. And so we put that together with clarity. The word stewardship is a beautiful word, sometimes neglected, often misunderstood. Stewardship means for Christians that everything belongs to God, everything. In my life, what I own financially, all of it belongs to God. And so our job is to be good stewards of what belongs to God. And how do we do that really is up to us. That may include recreation, may include a good meal, may include where we live, may include giving to the church, which is, to me, a very sacred thing. The gifts we give to church are sacred things. And knowing it from the inside such a long time, I'm fully aware how conservative that church leadership and pastors and staff really are. We're aware that the gifts are sacred. People gave them. It's our job to serve the community and the church and God well and how we spend this money. And so conversations are always around that. You know, some things, of course, are required. We have to do it. We have no choice. We have to pay the electric bill and building payments, things like that. But beyond that, it's really, where do we make the biggest difference? Where are we faithful to the mission God has for the church? Where is that? You know, is that a staff person that we have or pastor we have? Is that a ministry that we are doing? Is that making sure the church is open and welcoming to people when they walk in the door? And so those are always the valuation we have about your gifts. And that is a really very conscientious way that church is done and the way First Grapevine really does it. So I want you to be aware of that clearly. When I became a pastor as a young man the first time, Rhonda and I had already been tithing. We'd always done that. But I knew nothing about the church and money and what they did with it, didn't do with it. And I found out how important it was when I became the senior pastor of a very small church. It was real important. You know, what was in the offering on Sunday morning was a big deal. I didn't know that. I knew that my job was to give my part, and I gave my 10%. We did that together. $60 a month is what it was back in those years. I knew that was important. But I found out this is a big deal. You know, I got a call from our finance chair in that very first church one Sunday. At the end of the service, he called me later, and he said, Brother Mike, that dates me, and maybe some of you when he called Brother Mike, the offering was $1,000. It's the happiest I'd heard old Tommy ever sound, because that was not a happy man. He didn't live around happiness, was not the theme of his life. But people gave $1,000 to church today. We can pay our apportionments, which was that mission giving beyond the local church. We can pay all our salaries. We can do some of the stuff we've been wanting to do. You know, and you could just hear the vibration of joy in that we can really be a better church now than we were last Sunday. That's a small church. Now, in a church our size, it really is exactly the same, only compounded. When generosity steps up through new members and new people, long-term members, all of us, God blesses us, we bless God. When that happens in our life, the conversation changes in a church, especially in leadership, stewardship, finance, pastors, everybody else. Conversation changes from money to mission. And that change is dramatic. You can feel it. You can see it. It's absorbed by worship. Everything we do, that becomes part of the movement in who we are. To move, and we're going to talk about mission, reaching people for Christ, serving our community, welcoming everyone, being a great church, doing new things, expanding our life together, and that's a fun place to be, which is exactly why these folks in stewardship are here. Answer questions about your giving, what giving is used for, how we spend that, how it goes out. to have a sense of the importance and value of that, the treasure we all experience when those gifts do come in all the ways they come into our church, then how we work together to decide, now what are we going to do? What's our next steps? How are we going to handle this? And so we have things like budgets. I use the term, a budget really is how we fund our mission. We use the word budget, which is a little cold sometimes, I think, but that's the word we use to understand how money's laid out and understood. But this is how we're going to fund our mission. These are the numbers that are going to help us do that, and so we verbalize it that way. And so that's uniquely mentioned here earlier that the church is different because we're a nonprofit. We don't have to make a profit. Our job's to do great stuff for Jesus, and so that's what we try to do. So that's my kind of conclusion today. But if you have any questions, certainly we're all available always to answer those. If you're wondering about something, you want the budget, it's available to you. You can have a copy of it. Occasionally, we put it out for everybody in the back. Few people take them, but they are back there on occasion where we have the end-of-the-year budget for you, where you can see what came in, how we spend it. Don't panic when you see a little bit of red. We have a lot of red in our budget because that's how our budget looks, but don't worry about the red. But it helps you see kind of where we are, what we're doing. It comes to mission giving, which is also portionments, sometimes called that. Connectional giving is often called that as well. Long-term part of the United Methodist Church, and just knowing from the inside kind of how that works is the connectional giving request from local churches. It's a request. It's not a demand. We don't have to do it. Now, we want to, but we don't have to, have dropped in the last probably 4 years by at least 30%. And so the annual conference is asking for a lot less than they did some time ago. And so there are basic funds that are needed by the church. And we paid probably about 2/3 of what was asked this last year. The conference is very happy we were able to do that. That was a thank you for First Grapevine sending that in to help the conference. And for a few years before I came here, I served in a center that helped churches grow and do mission, do outreach and evangelism. And we did that pretty effectively, we think. And that was funded partially by gifts from First Grapevine and all the churches in our conference to fund that center to do its work. The other money that funded it was simply, sometimes a church in the country somewhere, sometimes they close, sometimes they end their life after 100 years or however long it is. The property sometimes is sold, and that money goes in to help fund that as well. And that's where our grants came from. It came from a church like Strawn, Texas, that community had, that church had finally ended its life and closed the church. We sold that property, and I was part of that. And some of that money now is going to help us begin some new work this coming year through those grants. So I'm saying more than you probably wanted me to say, but what time do we have? Can I talk some more? I'm going to talk about the Good Samaritan next. There's several Bible stories that I really like, so. Okay. At 11 o'clock, we're going to talk, he asked what we're going to talk about at 11. 11 o'clock, we're going to talk about our next concrete steps as a church. Church conference was held yesterday and approved a new budget, a new plan to fund our mission. It's higher than it was, but directly going to relate to what our next steps are to really move forward, if you want to use that terminology. We're excited about them, and we're going to have our program staff are all going to be up there talking about it. So you're going to see their faces. I'll talk about what we're going to do next, concrete steps. I use the word concrete, that giving will help fund. A few things we can do that don't require some kind of funding. That may be a youth program that says, we need to have some shirts that say we go to first grade, or whatever it might be. And it may also be a staff person that we may be adding, that kind of stuff. So I think you'll be excited. And I think that directly connect with the vision and heart this church already has. Simply addressing that specifically, concrete-wise, moving us forward, praying post-COVID. Lord have mercy, that becomes less significant than it has been. But that's our plan and our intention. We hope you'll come at 11 o'clock and help us spend time with you, all of us, all of our program staff talking to you about where we're going next. Any other thing I need to say that I haven't said?
No, but I'm going to ask Steve to pray us out. Steve Allen, it was my snafu that I was supposed to have Steve come up and open us in prayer. And as you saw, I didn't have my program, so I got all mixed up. But Steve, of course, is our business administrator. He's the wizard behind the curtain that makes all of this happen. He's a great guy. And Steve, if you would you come up and close us in prayer this morning?
Thank you, Judy. Can you hear me? All right. Well, I'm excited what the Lord's doing in the life of our church. And I thank you for the opportunity to pray us out and just encourage us all to see what God's doing in each of our lives, our families' lives, and how we can continue to further God's kingdom here in our community. So let us pray. Dear Lord, just want to thank you for who you are, for being here with us, and just for all that you have done in our church and all that you are doing and will do. We thank you for that. We thank you for the generosity of all of those that are here and those that can't be here with us. We just ask that you continue to give us the strength and wisdom and guidance on how to best use our times, talents, prayers, and other things that are part of our stewardship experience with you. Draw us closer to you, just strengthen us, and just let us be good witnesses for you in our community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.